Hi, I'm Dave Getz from West USA Realty here in the Phoenix area of Arizona, and I'm here to tell you 10 steps for how to buy a home no matter where you are in the country. If you have any questions along the way, please leave a comment in the comments section, and other people may be wondering the same thing. So let's get right to it. Step number one, I'm a little prejudiced, but you really need to find yourself a good realtor to represent you. You'll see as we go along, there'll be many steps along the way, virtually all of them, where the realtor is involved in helping you to make the purchase of the home the best way possible. So step number two is have your agent find a good lender. They'll need to get you pre-qualified, and without being pre-qualified for a loan, you won't even know what you can actually afford. Now, if you're paying cash, then you already know how much that's going to be, but nothing can mess up a transaction quicker than having a bad lender, so that's a really important step. And then that brings us to step number three. And that is have your agent set up a search on the MLS, that stands for Multiple Listing Service, and that's where all agents are going to put up their listings for people to find, for other agents to find and share with their clients. The reason you want to do this rather than going to some other of the online websites is your agent can set it up much more specific to your needs. So we can put in an exact geographical boundary. We can put in different things like if you want single story or if 2 stories okay, if you want 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms minimum, that sort of thing. And then we can also put in some very specific things like, let's just say if you don't want an HOA, we can filter those out. If you want only golf course lots, we can filter for those. If you want waterfront only, we can filter for those. So we can make it very specific and customized to your needs. And then once you find a home, that brings us to step number 4. And that's where your agent will set up a showing to let you go out and actually view in person any of the homes that you're interested in. There is no substitute for seeing them in person, other than I've had out-of-state buyers where I'll actually do a walkthrough video and just show it to them, either FaceTime or do a walkthrough video and put a link up on YouTube so people can see that. And those are extremely helpful if you're in that situation where you can't see it in person. But normally we're going to see it in person, and so your agent will coordinate with the listing agent to set up showings. I would recommend not trying to view too many at one time. I would recommend staying at about 5 maximum at one session of going out to look at homes. The reason for that is twofold. First of all, it's really hard to set them up when you get many more than that. If you have one of them that for whatever reason cancels and you can't see it, then that messes up, it's domino effect, messes up for the subsequent showings. And the other reason is everything just kind of melts together when you see too many. So it's hard to keep them separate. And a little side note is you want to take notes. If you have the listings printed out, you can put little notes on them to remind you which ones they are, maybe a feature that's kind of unique to that home to help you remember it later on, because trust me, they will run together after a while. So that brings us to our next step, which is step number 5. Pick a house that you want to put an offer in on and let your agent know. They can figure out the value by looking at comparable properties that have sold recently, and then your agent can, or at least should be able to, make adjustments for, like, if the property you're looking at has a pool but a comparable property does not have a pool, so they'll make an adjustment for that difference, and then come up with a value. And then at that point your agent will submit the offer to the listing agent, who will present it to the sellers, which is step number 6. So making the offer. Once the seller reviews your offer, they can either accept it as is, make a counter offer, or reject it outright. Very seldom will they reject it outright. Typically the only time that happens is if you put in such a lowball offer that they're offended by it and you're too far apart. So that's one reason why you really don't want to do lowball offers. You want to make them reasonable. I think another misconception is that virtually every offer is going to receive a counter offer, and that is just simply not the case. Whether I've got the buyers or the sellers, I find probably most times, more than half the times, there is no counter offer. It'll just be accepted as is. So that's why if you're reasonable to begin with, you can get an offer accepted without a counter offer in many cases. But if you need to do a counter offer, it's no big deal, and sometimes you can go back and forth 2, 3, 4 times if you have to. And that brings us to step number 7, which is once your offer gets accepted. And when that happens, your realtor will open escrow with a title company. There will be an escrow officer assigned to it. An escrow officer is simply someone who is a neutral third party to manage the transaction. So they are not in favor of either the buyer or the seller. They're just there to manage all the paperwork and recording and that sort of thing. And then your agent will also collect earnest money, or typically the title company will send a courier out to pick up an earnest money check. You can do a wire transfer if you're out of state or out of town or don't have a checking account. By the way, that earnest money, if you do a check, it does get deposited. So you do need to have the funds available once you write that earnest money check. At least in Arizona, you don't have to have earnest money, but without it, unless you are good friends with the people on the other side of the transaction, you're probably not going to get your offer accepted. Here in Arizona, there's no set amount. Kind of rule of thumb, typical is 1%, maybe rounded down a little bit. So if it's a $500,000 home, then the earnest money check would typically be about $5,000, but that's not set. You can do it any amount you want. So once escrow is opened, you will have an inspection period of due diligence. Here in Arizona, it's 10 days unless it's differentiated in the contract to be a different amount. And at that point, you want to get set up with a home inspection right away. I'm assuming you probably don't have a good home inspector, and again, that's where an agent comes in because they will have a home inspector that they deal with all the time and know and trust. So get that home inspection scheduled and then do your other due diligence. If you're concerned about the schools or crime or anything like that, this is the time to do it. And then when the home inspection occurs, you will meet with the home inspector. I always go to those, most agents do, and they'll go over the house. They'll have a big long list of things that are quote unquote wrong with the house. A lot of them you may not care about, but ones that are safety issues and that sort of thing, you for sure want to get fixed. If there's something you can do yourself, just go ahead and do it yourself. You don't want to get a big, huge, long list, if you can help it, of repairs for the seller to do, because they may just throw their hands up in the air and say, forget it, we're not going to do anything. So that's why you don't want to ask for any more than you really need to. You want to keep that list as low as possible, because once your agent submits paperwork to the seller's agent to present to the seller then decides, okay, I'll either do all of the repairs you requested, or I'll do some of them but not others, or I'm not going to do any of them. Now that last one typically does not happen unless you have asked for too many repairs, and that's the reason why you don't want to ask for too much. So otherwise, a lot of times they'll agree to do all the repairs, or they may agree to do some repairs and not others. If they agree to do all the repairs, great, you're all set. If they agree to do some and not others, then you can decide whether you want to accept that or not. Your state may have more back and forth, I'm not sure, but in Arizona, that's about it. So, and then if they reject doing any repairs, then you got a decision to make. Do you want to still go through with it? If it's worth it to you, you might still want to do it. I do want to forewarn you that getting through an agreement on the repairs is typically the most painful part of a transaction. So just be ready for that. And keep in mind, the seller is not the enemy. They don't want to do any more than they have to, and you want to get them to do as much as you can. So a lot of times there's some tension and hard feelings, but just remember, the seller is your ally, not your enemy. And then if you can't come to an agreement on the repairs, at that point you can cancel, and in Arizona you can cancel, get your full earnest money back. I'm assuming it's that way in the rest of the country, but you check with your agent to see about that. And then that brings us to step number 8. Once you get through the repairs, you will need to have an appraisal. That's if you're financing it. If you're paying cash, obviously you don't need to have it appraised. You could if you wanted to and write that into the contract, but typically that's one of the benefits to a seller of a cash offer is there is no appraisal, and so that's a benefit to them. But assuming you're going to finance the deal, at that point your lender will need to order an appraisal. We usually don't order that before we come to an agreement on the repairs, because if things are going to fall out because of the repairs, we don't want to see you have to spend the money to order an appraisal. So the appraiser will come in, he'll inspect the property and then write up a very thorough report. He'll do adjustments to comparable properties just like we agents do, and then present to the lender if he thinks it appraises at full value or not. If it appraises at or above full value, then no problem, you move ahead. If it appraises below the purchase price, then at that point there could be some negotiation, but either the buyer, you, will pay the difference in cash at closing between the purchase price and the appraised value, and then that amount will be in addition to your other closing costs. Or the seller will drop the price, the amount that the appraisal came in short, or you can meet somewhere in the middle. So that's where each situation is different, but you have to come to some sort of an agreement at that point. Once you get through the appraisal process, there will be a period where not much is happening as far as you can see, but behind the scenes, the lender is getting the loan financed, getting it through underwriting and that sort of thing. Don't worry if you don't hear from your agent too much after the appraisal, but if you have any questions or you just kind of get concerned of, hey, shouldn't we be doing something? We were talking every day before. Feel free to reach out to them, give them a call, text, email, and just say, hey, do we need to do anything? Is everything going fine? And just get some comfort in that way. And then that brings us to step number 9, which is, as the closing date approaches, you'll need to make sure that all the repairs have been completed. Here in Arizona, repairs need to be done 3 days prior to close of escrow. So at that point, your agent should get receipts from the other agent. And then the last thing before closing is you will do a final walkthrough. I always try to do those the very latest I can, like typically the day before closing, because what if you do it 3 days before closing and then all of a sudden there's a flood, the water to the refrigerator leaks or something like that, and there's a big flood? Well, then you got a big mess on your hands. So I always do it as late as possible. I mentioned about receipts. The seller is allowed to do certain repairs. So if they're simple, like not electrical repairs, not certain plumbing issues, a seller, if it's something simple, a seller can fix that themselves. So they don't necessarily have to have a receipt. But again, that's why you do the final walkthrough, just to make sure that anything like that gets done, that the seller fixes themselves. And then that brings us to step number 10. The big day finally arrives and your house closes. And what that entails is closing means that the county that you're in will record the transaction. So your escrow officer will take care of that. You don't have to do anything. You just kind of sit back, relax. Yeah, right, you're not going to relax that day. You're going to be anxious to hear. And then and we don't know exactly when it's going to record. It just depends on when the county gets around to that particular transaction. But once they do, they will let the escrow officer know. The escrow officer will let both agents know, and you can celebrate that you're finally done and you've got a brand new house that you love. Well, I hope you found this helpful. If you have, please like the video and subscribe to my channel, and that way you'll be notified of other helpful videos coming out in the future. And again, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section and I will answer them the best I can. And if it's something I don't know, I'll get an answer for you. So thanks for watching. Bye.